The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our Vanderbloemen Network live series, specifically on leading through crisis. On Tuesday, we had Jay Cranda, who helped us learn about the online church. Wherever we were in our journey, whether we're just getting online for the first time or we've been online for many, many years, it was so helpful to be able to hear from him as a pioneer in online church as to how to get set up and disciple people effectively online. But today you are in for a treat because we've got Jim Sheppard, who is the principal of Generis. We have been longtime friends of Generis. They're one of our strategic partners. We have so much overlap with the Generis team. And so I'm excited to learn from Jim today as we talk about giving and stewardship, specifically in crisis. So first, I am Holly Tate. I am the Vice President of Business Development at Vanderbloemen, where we help Christian organizations with staffing and succession planning. And I've been on the team almost 8 years, which is hard to believe.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
She started when she was 14.
Yes. Don't tell the employment lawyers.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we are so excited to have all of you with us. So many of you are already answering our question of where are you joining us from today? So make sure you check out your GoToWebinar panel on the right side. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from. We've got some folks from Minnesota, Michigan, Houston, where I am sitting right now. Let's see, we've got Oregon, Fort Wayne, Indiana. That's Tim Stevens' old stomping grounds. California. This is amazing. Folks from all over the country, Franklin, Tennessee. Somebody from Costa Rica. Hey, Adam, we're so glad to have you. So keep telling us where you're from. And this is the same spot where we would love for you to ask us questions. We're going to leave plenty of time at the end for question and answers. We had almost 200 questions on Tuesday's webinar, and I didn't leave enough time. So I want to make sure that we leave enough time for Jim and Tim to answer all of your questions. So you can do that there in the question box. I want to introduce you to Tim Stevens. Tim, it's a lot of your face here on this slide. I knew you would love that.
Wow.
Tim is the VP of Consulting at Vanderbloemen. I've had the honor and joy of working with him for over 5 years now on the Vanderbloemen team. Tim leads all of our consultants. We've got about 9 of them on our team. 8 or 9, I always forget because we're growing all the time. And so Tim leads that entire team, and Tim himself has led through crisis and coaches our own consultants and also clients through crisis. And so I'm excited to hear from Tim today. But our special guest is Jim Sheppard, the principal of Generis. So Jim, I would love to start today for you to just share your story. How did you end up where you are serving ministries today, and what does your life look like at Generis?
Well, that's a long story, and if we use that time to go through the whole thing, we'd be here a while. But let me just give you the condensed version. So I grew up in the church, became a Christian when I was 28. My career, I graduated from college. I had a business degree, majored in accounting, minored in finance, passed the CPA exam when I got out. Didn't go into public accounting because I was fascinated with business. And so I set out and created a career for myself in business and finance. Around 1992, the company that I was with got bought out and they eliminated my job. I was CFO of one of the divisions there, and they eliminated my job. And so I began just kind of a search for where God wanted me next. Had no idea, but this is where I would end up in September of 1992. And had even less of an idea that I'd still be doing this 28 and a half years later. So that's kind of where I ended up. You know, in this, having been here 28 years, that just means you've seen a lot. Also means you've gotten old on the job. But even before that, I've seen 2 times, and then 1 time back when I was in business. When I was in industry, some of you will remember the stock market crash of 1987. Very dramatic drop in the stock market. We didn't have access to the internet the way we did today, and so I was the CFO of a securities brokerage firm at the time. So imagine that. You know, I'm sitting there with a quote rod, and that was the only way you knew what stock quotes were back in the day, and I was watching the market tank. So that was a jolt. 9/11 was a jolt. I was with Generis when 9/11/2001 happened. That was a jolt. And then, of course, I was here in the season of 2008, 2009, when we saw kind of not so much a jolt, but this kind of, I call it the 10-round fight, where we went out every day and we're just getting beat. You know, it was more of a slow leak rather than just this jolt. Here's what I can say about all of those. I think it is important to know how to lead when the crisis hits. I think it's always also important to recognize that these seasons do pass and we do come back and become very resilient, especially here in America. That does happen. Can I predict when that's going to happen in the midst of the current crisis? Absolutely not. But I do know that it will subside and we will bounce back.
That is awesome, Jim. And that's one of the reasons that I was excited to have you as a part of this series, is because you have been in the financial industry and experienced crisis. And then also you have consulted hundreds, if not thousands, of ministries around the country through crises as well. Tim, what about you? Tell us about your story and your own experience leading through crisis.
Yeah, so kind of 3 chapters to my life, or at least my adult life in ministry. So I spent about 9 years in an organization called Life Action Ministries, and it's a nonprofit ministry, and then moved over to a church startup, a church plant called Granger Community Church. This was back in 1994. And there was 250 people meeting in a movie theater. In my previous work at Life Action, I'd been in like 800 different churches around America. And then, so I kind of thought I knew church, but then I joined up with this church meeting in the movie theater, and it just kind of blew my mind for what church could be and even should be. Stayed there for 20 years. Church grew to about 6,000, and then joined Vanderbloemen about 6 years ago. So yeah, probably the first thing that comes to mind is the meltdown of the market, banks and housing in 2008, 2009. We were in Granger's in a part of the country that's deeply affected by industry, called the Rust Belt, but very affected by what happens in the audio industry. So it was just devastated. We had 22% unemployment in the county that where we served, where we were located. And so, 1 out of every 5 people in our church were moving away to find jobs because there were just no jobs in the area. And it was bad in the rest of the country as well. So as we just began watching kind of dashboards over about a 3 or 4 month period and realized giving was going down, people were losing jobs, and the percentage of money we were spending on staff was going up. And so we had to go through a time of streamlining our staff, letting people go in a really bad economy, cutting hours for a lot of our part-time staff. It was a tough season that we just had, there's kind of things out of your control that we had to do. And a lot of that was, and I know we'll get into that probably today, a lot of that's just fear of the unknown, because when you're in it, you just don't know. You don't know how long this is going to last. You don't know what risks you should or shouldn't take. And so, and I think that one lasted a long while, longer probably than this one will, but it was a significant crisis.
Absolutely. And before we dive into specifically talking about giving and stewardship through the crisis now that we're facing with COVID-19, and still a lot of the unknown of how long this will last and what the turnaround will look like. Jim, you had some specific thoughts that you wanted to share that are a little bit more broad before we dive into giving and stewardship on leading through crisis. So we'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, so crisis is just a major disruption, is what it does. Whatever crisis it is, it's really disruptive in the order and flow of things that we had going. And here's the reality. We hate when disruption comes. All of us do, I think, generally. But we really should welcome it because it forces us to get better. What do I mean by that? So crisis, disruption is always living a little bit closer to your organization than you realize. Let's just think of it as kind of your house. It's out here in the yard somewhere. It may not be intruding, but it's out there. This COVID-19 thing, it was sitting out there. We just didn't know it was sitting out there. And sometimes disruption is more subtle, and it knocks at the door before it comes in. And sometimes it just comes to the front door like COVID-19 and says, I'm coming in, and plops itself down and says, now deal with this. Now, what I mean by why we should welcome disruption, because when we have disruption like we have right now, if you're a leader, you're examining everything under a microscope, everything, even things that you held dear just a month ago that you thought were non-negotiables in the life of your organization. You're examining those things under a microscope today. And some of the things that you're examining, you'll validate what you've already assumed and you'll go forward and you won't have changed anything, but you're now more committed to it then. But other things that you'll see, you'll say, oh man, I can't do that. I can't do that. That's just going to kill me. And so disruption comes like an unwelcome stranger and plops itself down and forces us to deal with it, and we'll get better. I mean, let's just think about this, for example, the whole idea that crisis accelerates innovation. Have you seen more innovation in the church than you've seen in the last 2 weeks? I mean, it forces you, churches that I never thought I'd see online have all of a sudden gotten online. Now they're figuring out how to do it, and their service may not look like, some of the ones that have been doing it for a while, but did you ever think you'd even see them online? I mean,
No,
it's amazing. And then all the other things. So we hate it when disruption comes, but the reality is, because of what it does to us and for us, we should welcome disruption every now and then.
Absolutely. And Tim, would you say that's true of your experience in leading churches on your own, and then also in what you see as you kind of have this bird's eye view of the broader kingdom around the country?
Absolutely. I think I love what you just said about innovation. I think in crisis is when the creativity of the church is unleashed. We don't have to be real creative if we have a lot of money and we have a lot of staff and things are up and to the right. I mean, you can just kind of keep doing what you're doing. But when things get tight and suddenly we don't have the budget we had, or we don't have the staff we had, or we don't have a way to even see people, no one can come to our building. Those things like that, I think churches get really creative. It's been fun working with churches recently that they're trying to, like, how do we have a new pastor, the church hasn't met him yet, we need to take a congregational vote. How do we do that when we can't meet with our people? And the creativity that's coming out of that is pretty cool.
That's amazing.
Holly, and here's one other idea about leading in crisis. And this is, with apologies to my my ninth grade literature teacher, who didn't think that I was paying attention to all that poetry she was shoving down our throats. Rudyard Kipling, in the poem If. Do you remember the opening line to that poem? It says, "If you can keep your head when all around are losing theirs." And I think that's really one of the leader's primary responsibilities, is when everything is shifting and everyone else is losing their mind. As a leader, you've got to gather yourself and realize that you're going to have a responsibility to your family, to your organization, if you serve in your church, and then primarily to yourself. You're going to have to lead yourself well in this season. Even us as leaders, even the most resilient of us, we're shaken by what we've seen happen in COVID-19. We didn't see it coming. It's deeper and more vast than we ever imagined in a very short period of time. But we have to gather ourselves and kind of get our heads when everybody else is losing theirs. And for me, I think it's just this one thing. I'm going to go back to this whole idea of, kind of what I've been saying to the Lord daily is, I don't know how this ends, but I know you. I know you. And I know you. I know you are good. I know you're kind. I know you're for me. I know that you have a plan for me. I know that you have a plan for all humankind. I know that it all works out. You've already written the book. We just don't know what happens between now and then. But I know how it ends, and I know where I end up. And so in the midst of the craziest of times and circumstances that are really challenging, I can anchor myself in that, and that helps me to get my head and keep my wits. And here's why keeping your head is so important as a leader, is that when you start to let emotion creep into your decision, you will make some of the worst decisions of your life. And this is no time for getting emotional and making bad decisions. The margin for bad decisions is very low right now. And so when you can keep emotion suppressed, not that you can keep it out altogether, but you can keep your head when others are losing theirs and keep emotion out of it, you've got a lot better chance to navigate well through a crisis time like this.
That's so good. I'm going to look up that poem right after this, and maybe
there's a lot to it,
paste
because
it on
it
my
ends
wall.
up saying, it says, then yours is the world, my friend. It goes through a lot of ifs, and then it says, and then yours is the world. And so, she didn't think I was paying attention in ninth grade, but actually I did.
And here you are, helping others lead through crisis. That's awesome. All right, let's dive in a bit to the topic that everyone is here to hear from you on today, which is giving and stewardship. So Jim, right now, I know you have your phone has probably been blowing up with clients and friends asking for your wisdom and advice. What are you seeing? Is giving up? Is giving down? Talk to us about what you're seeing in the landscape right now.
Yeah. So we have had collectively our team. We've had hundreds of phone calls with church leaders over the last 2 weeks. Our phone lines and our Zoom lines have been, you're ringing off the hook. I spend my days, nonstop from the time that I start in the morning until, right before dinner, nonstop. You and I were talking earlier. I'm running my AirPods out twice a day. I have to recharge the batteries. And I think what I'm hearing is essentially this. This is kind of a common denominator. Man, I had a plan for 2020 and it was so good, and then a bomb went off. I mean, a bomb went off. And I feel like my 2020 plan has been through the shredder at the office, and now I've just got holding a handful of confetti. And there's a sense in which that feeling that way is correct. But let's navigate through that and let's figure out what's really going on underneath that. Churches that were not doing a good job of developing a culture of generosity are going to pay a bigger price in this season than others. Now, let me also pause here for a second and say, organizations, Christian organizations, ministry organizations, and everybody who's not a church is more at risk than the church is, frankly. Because in the church, we've got a different kind of a constituency, and we have a different connection to our constituency. And I think that makes a difference. If you look at all of the big crises, 9/11, 2001, and 08 and 09, churches fared much better than all of the other 501c3s that are not churches, even in the Christian world. So we have what I call this home field advantage and this ability to deal with our people better. That said, we are seeing shifts in giving. Some are seeing it more than others. Some of it is regionalized. So if you're in an area that has been hit a little bit harder than another area, you're feeling it a little bit more. If you're in an area that hasn't been hit as hard, you're probably not feeling it as much. To the extent that you've developed, your people in their giving practices, discipleship, we would say, you probably are not. To the extent that you have, let's just say, I've got 2 clients that I've talked to within the last week. One of them gets 11% of its giving outside of Sunday morning service. The other one gets 78% of its giving outside Sunday morning service. So as you can imagine, those are very different conversations with those 2 leaders. The one that's getting 11% immediately said to me, I need a giving platform. Yeah, you do, probably, right? So there is a shift in giving, and I think giving is really kind of up in the air right now. I think the main thing that leaders have to think about right now is not so much growing giving, but stabilizing giving. How do I stabilize giving in the moment? And I think there's some things that you can do to do that.
That's great. Tim,
what are you want me to talk about those, right?
Yeah, almost. Yes, Tim, what are you seeing as far as folks calling you, even though we're not the financial or stewardship or generosity experts at Vanderbloemen, giving is so tied to what we do at Vanderbloemen. So what would you add to what Jim is seeing?
Yeah, I think there's, it seems like there's reality and then there's projections. And so I think every church I've talked to, projection wise, is assuming things are going to get tighter, hiring freezes, expense cuts, that kind of thing. And so, and that's probably a very conservative and very appropriate thing to do. If I was leading a church today, I would be doing the same exact thing. And then there's reality, and the reality, I would say both sides of that also. I've heard of a couple churches where their giving has stayed steady or even slightly up. I think those churches especially have figured out ways to rally people around compassion and, kind of unleashing compassion and meeting people's needs, and people are buying into that. Those churches are probably also have a lot more of their giving, as Jim suggested, already digital in nature. And scheduled. And so that's really helpful. One church a couple churches I've talked to where they're below 50% digital giving, they are being creative about that. They're putting together lists of their top donors who do not have scheduled giving online, and they're just reaching out and praying with them and asking them, these are people that are faithful in their giving, they're just not giving online, and asking them, would you consider shifting your giving to digital during this time? So it gives them an opportunity to kind of increase that percentage, which gives them some shock absorber for seasons like this. So it's cool to see the creativity being unleashed there as well.
That's great. We've already got some great questions coming in. So I want to encourage everybody, as Jim and Tim are sharing, would love for you to put your questions there in the question box, and we're going to get to as many as we can in today's webinar. So Jim, what should churches and ministries who are experiencing that decrease in giving right now, what do they need to be doing? I mean, I think that's one of the questions that I know we're getting at Vanderbloemen is, we don't even know what to do. I got a text yesterday from a church leader. Their giving is down 25% from last week, and they're about to face Sunday, and they don't even know what the next week's going to look like. So what should they be doing?
Yeah, so this is a time when you don't need a list of 11 things. You don't need 8 things. You need 3 things. You need 3 things that you can act on right now that will make a difference, and you'll see fruit from it. And so, having done all of these phone calls, all these conversations with leaders over the last couple of weeks, here's what I've come to. I think there's 3 things that ought to be at the top of the list. Number 1, anchor your key givers. Anchor and stabilize your key givers. What do I mean by that? In every church, there is a small number of people that accounts for a disproportionate share of the total. 15 to 20% of the people who are giving 65 to 80% of the total. If you're a leader and you didn't know that before today, you need to know that. I've looked at thousands of church numbers over the years. I know what I'm talking about. It is unmistakable. Whether you're a small church in the woods in Mississippi, or you're a large church in the metropolis of New York City, your numbers might look different, but you both have a small number of people who are giving a disproportionate share of the total. Many churches, our clients, have already developed relationships with those people. We would say to them, make sure that you are pastoring and discipling those people well. Now, let me just take a sidetrack here and make sure we're clear about this. This is not favoritism. This is not making these people out as better than somebody else. They just happen to be the people who are financially the leaders in the church. And so what we would say is all givers are the same, not all gifts are the same. Even in the Bible, we talk about the widow and her 2 mites, but then we can also look over in 1 Chronicles 29 and see King David and his gift to the temple in Jerusalem. Both were givers, both were extraordinary givers, but their gifts were very different in the value of them. So it is important for a pastor to stabilize these givers. You're not calling to ask for anything, but you are calling to make sure they're okay. Thank them for their giving. Thank them for their faithfulness. And I can tell you, I already know of pastors who are hearing people say, hey, pastor, I'm in a business and I'm actually not paying a price right now. In fact, I'm actually flourishing. I know a guy who's in the pool chemical business who's converting half of his capacity to hand sanitizer in 10 days. His business plan for 2020 is 40% bigger than he started the first of the year. So if someone pops up in a conversation like that, then what you might say is, Jim, is there any way that you and Nancy might be able to lean in a little bit more with your giving between now and September and maybe make up some of the shortfall there? So stabilize that top group of givers and do that immediately. That's step number 1. Step number 2, and I've already put out a video on it. It'll be on the resource page that we're going to offer at the end of this call, is do your offering effectively in the online church environment. I watched a lot of church services that first weekend. A week ago this past Sunday, that was our first weekend for a lot of us doing that in kind of online church, which we've learned is different than streaming our guy on Sunday morning from the platform. Online church looks different than that. And what I saw was a lot of churches that did the experience well, but they did the offering poorly. It felt like an administrative detail in the midst of the worship service. And as a result, they paid a price for it. And all of a sudden we had their attention. I had one leader who texted me, hey man, I run $40,000 a week and I got 5,000 last Sunday. And I said, hey, then you're going to want to watch this video. Heard from him this week, $47,000 this week. And he didn't make it all up, but he did a lot better. Okay, so you've got to create a specific focused offering moment, whatever looks natural to you. And very importantly, Holly, whether you have 11% of your giving online or 78% of it, you've got to have a slide sitting right there in front of you during the offering moment that tells people exactly how to give. The give button needs to be very clear on your website. Don't make people squint and look for it. No, don't make you have to do a search for give. It ought to be right there. And give people instructions. Encourage people who are not giving online to go sign up. You might even have a demo of that on your social media or your website or in your weekly email or something like that. Make it easy. Don't assume people know how to get through this stuff, because even the best apps, they don't know how to do that. But here, and publish text to give. If you have text to give, put the number, put all the things right there. Remember, they don't have that worship bulletin in their hand. They don't have the screen in front of them on Sunday morning. You've got to make it super easy. And here's the important one. There are people who give by check who are not going to move to automated giving, and they have no idea how to give during this season. Make sure they know how. Hey, if you're a person who would rather give by check, if you'll email us and let us know, we can send you 4 envelopes with a stamp on it. We also have a drop box outside the office. We're monitoring that. It's very secure. You can drop by if you, might be a good time to get out, and you don't have to talk to anybody. And then, or if you've got a mail slot, lots of older churches have the old classic mail slot. You have to let your people know who are going to give by check and are not going to come online. How do they do that? So have a very intentional offering moment, and tell them to watch this video. There's more on the video that I did, and it'll be on the resource page. So that's number 2. Number 3, communicate, 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 especially with your most engaged people. It's easy to see inside it. You probably don't even need your church management system. You know who the people are who lead and volunteer and serve and do all the things in your church and give. You know who those people are. It's not this other group of the financial leaders. Some of them are, but some of them are just a part of that really stable middle section of your church that supports everything you do. Those leaders are in a vacuum right now. And if you don't communicate with them, they stay engaged. They're used to being down at the church and serving and giving and doing and volunteering and doing, and they're not there. And make sure that they know how to engage. You know how to engage with them during the series, this season. You might even create special communications that go directly to them and not to the church at large. But communicate, communicate, communicate in this season. Those are my top 3 things, actionable right now.
Jim, that was mic drop. Oh my goodness. That was phenomenal. I think the key is, and you said this at the beginning with your example of the gentleman that you know who pivoted his entire supply chain to hand sanitizer. It's agility. And the example you gave, it's so crazy. And the example you gave, and that's agility, is our founder, William Vanderbloemen's favorite word. It's one of our values, is ever increasing agility at Vanderbloemen. But the example that you used of communicating, even about the Dropbox, where you can drop off your giving or put it in the mail slot. It feels like a little bit going backwards on the innovation scale, but the key is that you're pivoting and you're being agile to communicate, to meet your congregation where they are, rather than forcing them to pivot into something new. I think that is so smart, just to make sure that you're accessible to everybody.
On the word agility, Holly, just for a second, I hear a lot of people talking about speed as being, kind of the thing. Speed is not what you need right now. Speed's important, but anybody can run in a straight line. Agility means that I'm tacking my boat over here to the left. If I was a sailor, all of a sudden the wind shifts and I've got to tack back this way. I've got to be agile enough to take in the actionable intelligence that's coming to me and make the shifts. And the people who do the best in this season, whether it's giving or leading in general, they're going to be the people who have the most agility in this season at tacking left and right when they need to.
That's great.
Couple thoughts. I think I love your point on communication. I think we on church staff, we live in it, right? We're living in 40 to 60 hours a week, sometimes more. And we assume everyone else is thinking about church 40 to 60 hours a week too, but they have day jobs, they have lives, they have families. And so the basic thing, like, people know how to give. Of course they do. Well, no, because there used to be this box or this bucket that used to pass in front of them. They didn't have to think about it. And so I love that, of getting the word out. And on your first point of engaging with those that are the most financially engaged, I think some churches struggle. I'd love to hear you talk about this, Jim. I think some churches struggle on this. Maybe they may assign it to a theological point, or definitely philosophical, that comes from a stance of, well, we don't know what anyone gives. We want to treat everyone equally. And I like to stretch churches when they say that, because I think who's leading your nursery, who's leading your music ministry. You don't treat all of them equally. The people that give the most of their time, you tend to be more engaged with and pouring into and developing. What do you say to churches that, in a time like this, it's like, we don't even know how to identify them because there's one person, it's our financial secretary, and he or she's the only one that knows who anyone what anyone gives around here. How do I engage with them?
Such a great question.
That's a great question, Tim. And I think there is a way around that. And that is that I think you can make the assumption that the people who are leaders in your community and leaders in business in your community are some of your best givers. Now, whether they are or not, I think you could start with that assumption. And and I think every pastor knows who those people are. If you've got Jim who's out here and he's the executive vice president of a very large successful company in town and he's a member of your church, you have every reason to believe that Jim is one of the financial leaders in your church. If he's not, then in the conversation, you might actually be provoking him to become one of the good givers in your church and just kind of rally around that. So that's a great question, because I do know there are churches like that don't have that awareness.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I've got one more question for you, Jim, and then I'm going to stop asking questions so we can let the audience ask their questions, because we're getting some fantastic questions. So again, if you've got a question, don't be shy. Post it in the question box. We're going to get through as many as we can before our time ends together today. So Jim, we did a webinar yesterday with Dr. Katie Weems, who's the executive director of CISA, Council on Educational Standards and Accountability. Anyway, it was for Christian private secondary schools. And one of the things that she said that I thought was so wise, and it's obvious once you hear someone say it, but I hadn't really thought about it like this before. She said, when you're leading in crisis, you have to have one foot in the now, but you have to have the next foot in the future. And so I would love to hear from you as leaders there's a lot of people on this call today that are wondering how they're going to be able to pay payroll next week, or are wondering, are we going to have to close our doors or merge with another church in town? What would you say to leaders right now who are feeling that weight of leading in crisis, of how to be present, but also lead strategically from a generosity perspective into the future after we get out of COVID-19?
Yeah, so here's what I would say. A couple of things just to start up, and then I'll get very specific about this. The one thing that I've seen and our team has seen over the last 2 weeks is just a lot of people jumping to a knee-jerk reaction. And the knee-jerk reaction in church world tends to be, we're going to have to cut staff. Well, why did you go there first? I mean, that may not be the place you need to go first. So it may be at some point, but resist the knee-jerk reaction, the felt thing. Now that's where emotion creeps into your decision making. You got to get that out of your decision making so you can take stock of the times. I love in 1 Chronicles 12:32 when the Bible is going through and citing the strengths of all the tribes, and it talks about the men of Issachar, that they were discerning of the times and knew what Israel ought to do. And we really need men and women of the tribe of Issachar in this time to be discerning of the times and to know what our churches should do. So resist knee-jerk reactions. Now, let me be very specific about it. I'm a financial guy by training and background. I mean, I was a CPA back in the day. I was chief financial officer of 2 companies along the way. So measuring numbers and being careful financially is a big part. I get that. Here's what I would do if I were, by the way, we've already done this at Generis. You've probably done this at Vanderbloemen as well. We have scenario A, scenario B, and scenario C. Well, we have scenario 2020, our original financial plan for 2020, which we had back in February. It looked so good back in February. We haven't shredded it yet because we like to look at it and like, man, that wasn't that long ago. So we have our original plan, and then we have 3 more scenarios, depending on how deep this is. So there's a first measure of things that's basically fact. I mean, there are things that we can probably do, and hardly anyone will see the effect of them. And we think, frankly, we're hoping that that's going to be our scenario that we can work. If we can work through scenario A and get to the point where we think that we can take everything on from there, then that's our preferred one. But then there's scenario B. If things get worse and or last longer, we know what our next step is beyond that. And then we have kind of mapped out what is, we hope we never have to pull it out, but we've actually looked at it, is plan C. Let me tell you what that did for us. We sort of know where things go. And even though the worst case one, we've taken stock of it and we know what our next steps are. We know what they are, and there's some comfort in there. It grounds you as a leader, and it keeps you from making these knee-jerk, just rapid, almost reactive type decisions. Resist reactive decision making. Take stock of what's really going on. leverage actionable intelligence. And boy, that's crazy in this season, because frankly, I don't even know what to believe in terms of the medical numbers. So I'm kind of ignoring all of that. And I'm just looking at the economic numbers, right? And trying, because that's really where the fallout's going to be. We're going to get over the medical crisis a long time before we get over the financial and economic damage that's going to happen in here. So that's what I would say in that, Holly. I think just for every leader, just, those are my big words to you. Resist knee-jerk reactions. Be careful. Have a plan A, plan B, plan C, and then just work through those systematically.
That's great. Tim, what would you add to that?
No, I think that's exactly right. I think we tend to, I think why sometimes staffing goes first is because churches run really, really tight. Sometimes they're overstaffed. Sometimes they've overextended themselves with buildings or whatever. And so there's hardly any margin. There's no reserves. And so something like this comes out of left field, and suddenly, we're like, well, probably we can't get rid of our mortgage. So the next most expensive thing where we can find a lot of money is in staff. And fortunately, and maybe you'll direct to this later in the broadcast here, is the webinar that we did yesterday. Fortunately, there's some help coming to churches and nonprofits that can help mitigate that and then actually incentivize you to not let staff go in a crisis like this.
Absolutely. Yes. We did a Facebook Live yesterday with Sutton Turner, our COO, who was glued to C-SPAN and read through the bill. That is like so not in my gift skill set. But he loves it. And so
there are members of Congress that haven't read the bill. He read the bill.
Exactly, right? So we are, big caveat, we're not legal experts, definitely not financial advisors, but Sutton did a phenomenal job of reading it through the perspective of course, small businesses, because that's what Vanderbloemen is, but then also, our clients, which are churches, nonprofits, any 501c3, but specifically on the Christian side, Christian private schools. So that's on our Facebook page. If you want to, I highly recommend you check it out. And then I interviewed Sutton this morning for an update now that it's actually passed through the Senate. We still got some steps to go, but that was good to hear an update from him. All right, well, I'm going to dive into some of these amazing questions that we've got. Another reminder to please go to generis.com/COVID-19. They have amazing resources right there. It's a hub for the videos that Jim was referring to. Several of the team members at Generis have been making videos. Fantastic resources for you as ministry and church leaders. All right, so let's—
Hey, Holly, and by the way, there too, they can schedule a 30-minute call with us. We'll actually take more than 30 minutes. We're just limiting to 30 so we can take more appointments. But we'll call you free, no obligation. We'll help you think through some of this.
That is so good. Absolutely, Jim. Yes, go to generis.com/COVID-19. You can schedule. I love it because you can literally pick a time on the calendar that works for you and meet for free with one of the Generis consultants. Okay, here's a question. How do we balance benevolence, like reaching the hurting community, with internal needs, staff, mortgage, etc., when giving is tight?
Wow, that's a great question. And that's one of the questions that I would put in front of these financial leaders when you're talking to them. Some of these financial leaders are asking, hey, Pastor, I can help, I'll stabilize giving, I'll keep giving to the regular, but is there something else I can do right now, something that's really pressing? And the number one thing I'm hearing is benevolence. And I'll just use my own church as an example. My pastor has been making some of these calls, some of these contacts, and we got a call back. I think it was on Tuesday afternoon. I can say this now because the email went out yesterday and it's now in the public space. We have one of our givers who said, in addition to everything I'm already doing for the church, I'm giving a $250,000 match to boost our benevolence. So basically we're going to, and I'm sure we'll meet the match. So we're going to get a $500,000 injection into our benevolence. That was through making contacts with these financial leaders who do have some of them do have extra capacity in this moment. They're more likely to have that capacity than the people who are down here, the working family of four on $90,000 a year. They might be great, faithful, tithing givers, but their margin to do extra in the season is virtually non-existent. And these people, these financial leaders, do have something. So that's where I would lean in on that. I would say it maybe this way, Holly. I know that many of you do not have extra capacity right now, and that's okay. But if you do, and you could in this season, just know that our requests for benevolence are bigger than ever, and your money would go a long way towards serving needs in the community and meeting those needs. So that's kind of how I would phrase that.
That's
Great
so
question.
good. That is a phenomenal question. Tim, what would you add? I know you've been through this at your own church at Granger, and as you're consulting with our clients, what wisdom would you share as far as navigating the outreach or benevolence fund versus internal needs?
I would say raising money for internal needs. I mean, it's really hard to get people excited about the electric bill or about paper supplies for the bathrooms. Every time I've seen our church or churches lean into benevolence and kind of have a laser focus of generosity for a season, the church grows, other giving grows, people's hearts grow, engagement grows. I think churches have a real opportunity right now to become known for generosity in their area. I was talking to a friend of ours that's a pastor in Vancouver, Washington yesterday, and they just had this idea of like, let's see if our janitorial supply company, if we can just buy a couple thousand rolls of toilet paper. So they did that and they just started giving it out. And the pastor there said he's been interviewed by every news channel in town. So this,
Wow.
I mean, this idea of generosity, I think it just, they didn't do it for that reason, but when you unleash generosity, it tends to grow everything else.
Awesome.
And I think that's a great thing for the church and a great opportunity right now.
Yeah, you shared at the beginning, it's hard to get people excited about raising money for janitorial supplies. And I almost interrupted you and said, except for toilet paper right now. And then you shared that example. That was great.
Yeah, that's right.
Jim, are you...
hand towels, 200,000.
Exactly. Right. Jim, this is a question from Dan. He's asking, and I would love to hear this in your experience, because I know Generis does a ton of research and reporting. Is there a percentage you are hearing that reflects the potential reduction? And I think that is specifically, Dan, I'm assuming that he's asking specifically about church giving, but maybe we don't know for COVID-19, but can you speak to your experience about giving and stewardship through crisis previously and what church leaders might expect as far as how it might decrease with COVID-19?
Yeah. So let's just compare and contrast what happened in 2001, 9/11, 2001 versus what happened in 08, 09. So 9/11, 2001, what everybody talks about is the jolt it was financially. What you don't hear as much is the fact that the stock market within about 75 days was back to where it started. 9/11 was a jolt to our system. It had short-term economic impact, but we bounced back pretty quickly from that. And so church giving didn't really take that much of a hit during that time. 2008 and 2009 was a little bit different because it was a slow bleed. It's like, think about the tire in your car. 2001 was a blowout. And then 2008 and 9 was the slow leak. And all of a sudden your tire pressure monitor goes off and says, hey, Holly, you have a flat tire. And so we saw a different thing. And it took a while for that, because we had the major issues in the fundamentals of the financial system, that being mainly the subprime mortgage mess and what it took to bleed all of that out and get that passed through the system. It was like having a bad case of dysentery. You get over the nausea and the diarrhea sooner than your body gets back into a normal rhythm. And so it took a little while longer. And we saw, but here's what I want you. We saw some churches that took a hit during that time. We also saw some churches that went up during that time. And we saw a lot of churches stay stable. And I don't want to go into the longer talk on this, because anyone who knows me knows that I have a stump speech on this. To the extent that you suffer an economic hit, it's more about things inside your church than outside your church. Now, this season might be short-term, a little bit of an exception to that. But the ones who rebound the fastest are going to be the ones who have the clearest vision, the highest impact, really laser focused, on what they're trying to do, what wins look like, who are talking about wins, who develop strong giving systems, both electronically and otherwise, who make their offering moment every week kind of an inspirational sequence. I mean, those are things that you have to do. And the ones that are going to pay the biggest price in this season are not so much the ones who are getting hit economically. They're the ones who are unprepared from the internal sense of it. They don't have good giving systems. They haven't discipled their high capacity givers. Their communication is off, and all these other things. And so, I think you could be looking, depending on who you are. I hate to use generalities. You could be looking at a hit of 10 to 35%. I think that depends on who you are, where you are, how your church is set up, context, theology. How you frame giving in the life of your church. So it's hard to put one number on there. But if I were framed, by the way, if I was doing my A, B, and C, I'd have a 10% scenario. I'd probably have something in the middle, and I might have a 40% reduction scenario to know what I would do at each one of those points in terms of rearranging my financial plan.
Well, and one thing that I love that you just said is that it's so nuanced. And so that's why people really should go and try to schedule a call with one of the Generis consultants, because that consultant will be able to speak to the church's specific situation. And because I got an email, it's so bizarre. I'm getting an email in 1 second that's from somebody who's giving, when we're talking about one of the largest churches in the country, whose giving was down, by 25% week over week. And then I got an email from another church that's in a more high wealth area, who their giving was up by 25% because they're not as affected yet. So that's where it really is so nuanced. And so I would really encourage everybody to go schedule a free call with the Generis team. Okay, I'm going to try to let's try to tighten up our answers a little bit, guys. Because we've got so many. Okay, already providing e-transfer and PayPal. Will adding another online giving platform be worth it?
E-transfer, what? I'm not sure.
I'm assuming like ACH, maybe like direct deposit.
Okay. Yes, I think you need to have another giving.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you do need to have another giving platform. I think there's a number of good ones out there. There's a number of them that we like. We love PushPay. We love Tithely. We love Kindred. Those are really user-friendly systems out there. A lot of times, Holly, what people adopt is the one that seems to be the most cost-efficient inside of the church. That's not the one you need to choose. You need to choose the one that people will actually use. It needs to be user-friendly, and I do think you would see increased adoption with that platform out there. It allows people to do debit card giving. If your theology and philosophy of your church allows credit cards, and you can put that on there too. Other forms of giving can happen on there. It also is a mode that a lot of younger givers tend to like, and so I would put it out there.
That's good. This is for both Tim and Jim. Do you have an example of a church that did that giving moment really, really well with the online services in the last couple of weeks? Putting you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah, so if you want to go to my church, Perimeter Church, and go to the 27-minute mark in our online service and see my pastor, Jeff Norris, do what he did last weekend, I thought Jeff did a great job with that. And I'm a little bit biased at my own church, but I think they followed that offering video, the advice that I had on there, and followed it really well. And I know what the numbers are week over week, and we're stabilized. But we've got, by the way, we've got plenty of reserves, so we didn't have to hit the panic button. We've got a well-developed culture and financial system, so we haven't had to hit the financial button. We're keeping an eye on it, but our numbers are pretty stable right now. And I think last weekend was reflective of that. So there are others, but that's probably the one that I know the best.
It's awesome. Tim,
Perimeter Church, find them on Facebook, look at last Sunday's service.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say the one that comes to mind would be Bayside Church in California. I don't know the minute marker on the video. Jim's much more astute than I am, but check that out. I think they did a really good job, and their giving has held up these last 2 weeks. And on the benevolent front, a small church in North Carolina, I heard about this yesterday, that they on their website, like front and center, there's 2 buttons. One says, I have a need, and one says I can meet a need. And so they're matching up, elderly folks that need groceries with, younger folks that can make a difference and go pick up the groceries. So I just thought that was pretty cool.
That is awesome. I love it. There's that creativity right there.
Love that.
Here's another, speaking of creativity, Ricky says, we had good response by having a 1-hour period after the online service where we did drive-through giving. They could bring their offering and give to a pastor. It gave a quick touch and allowed us to pray with them. So that's very similar to the idea you shared earlier, Jim. That's awesome. Okay, Mark is saying, we are staff heavy and creative with our budget to operate. What are some options on how to decrease payroll? We kind of addressed that a little bit earlier, but any additional thoughts on that?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think you've got to go in that, and this has to be, I'd look at scenarios on where you think your giving is going to land over the next 30, 60, 90 days. And, you know, you've got to go in and categorize what's essential to the mission, and then what can we, you know, everybody seems essential at some point in time, but it's when times get lean, there are some positions that are more essential than others, and you've got to start making some choices about, you know, what might happen first. One of the things that you might consider is, rather than taking people off as a temporary reduction across the board, that is an option. It doesn't work everywhere, but maybe rather than taking out 6 people, you do a temporary 10% decrease for everybody. Everybody feels the pain, and then you go back to norm as soon as you can. So those would be some options I'd look at.
And I would add, the time to if you have to let someone go, and don't do that before you listen to yesterday's webinar, but if you have to let someone go, do it while you still can provide some support for them on the back end. So don't wait until like there's no money in the banking account and we let them go, and there's no severance, there's no shock absorber for them and their family. Their insurance gets cut off immediately. When we did those layoffs in 2009, it's because we could see 6 months ahead that we were going to be in trouble. So we were able to let people go with a fairly significant severance, connecting them with an employment agency to help them make resumes and have office space and, you know, support them, as well as insurance for their families.
It's good. Jim, how many weeks reserve does the average church maintain? Maybe the real question should be not what the actual average is, but what should the average be? Because I bet a lot of churches do not have the reserve that they should have.
Yeah, thanks for reframing that question, because sadly, we've talked to way too many churches in the last 2 weeks who are basically 1 month of offerings away from being broke. And that's just not acceptable. You can't be running like that. Nobody would run a business like that. And so you have to run this balance between, givers expect for you to deploy every dollar into ministry, but givers also expect you to maintain stability. And so, you know, I would say, just Jim, this doesn't mean it's everybody's rule. This is not even the Generis point of view. Generis doesn't actually have a point of view on this, but Jim does. And I'm a financial guy by training and background. If it were me, and especially if what I've learned in this, I would have said this before, but I think it's been reinforced. I would have a minimum of 3 months of operating expenses on reserve for a rainy day. And what that does is that buys you time in a season like this, if you don't have to hit the panic button right away. My church has a little bit more than that. We have a very conservative philosophy in my church, but I would say everyone should just be thinking about 3. Now, you probably can't get there to 3 today, but as we emerge from this, I would encourage you to think about that in the future, because I think something like this could happen again. It could happen again, and we need to be prepared for it.
That's great. And it's a similar question. We have 5 months of cash reserves that are currently using, but how much should we dip into it? What is a healthy reserve to keep in this crisis? So you just answered that. Lots of folks asking about cash reserves. And similar to what Tim said, would encourage everybody to go and watch the webinar from yesterday, because part of, if this, you know, it passed the Senate last night, it has to pass through the House, and then of course the president has to sign it. But before you lay people off, go watch that, because it might be to your benefit to keep them on staff with how the government loan and forgiveness of the loan is working. So it's changing literally by the minute. So definitely we're keeping everything updated on that site. So quick reminder before people hop off, I've had a couple of folks say that the link isn't working. Try typing in www.generis.com/COVID-19. I know the link is working. I think it's just a matter of whether you're typing in www or not. Oh, technology, don't we love it? And if you still have trouble, you can email me, holly@vanderbloemen.com, and I will definitely get you the link to that website where you can schedule a time to talk with a Generis consultant. And also check out all of the videos that they are creating. And we are getting more and more questions coming in. So what I will do is share these questions with the Generis team so that they can create content on and answer these questions, because there are so many wonderful, wonderful questions coming in here. Tim, do you remember what the church in North Carolina was? We're getting lots of questions about them.
Mountain Grove, and I don't remember the city, but Mountain Grove Church is the name of the church.
Great. Awesome.
Hickory, well, I think it might be Hickory, North Carolina, if I recall right.
Great. And
Oh
then
yeah,
Jim,
furniture capital of the world, baby.
that's right. And in the church that Jim, we're getting several questions about that. It was Perimeter Church in the Atlanta area,
Yep.
as well. So,
Yep.
let's
And you
see.
have to go on our website, Holly. We only have the message. On Facebook Live, you'll see the full video of the service. Go to the 27-minute mark there.
Perfect. Fantastic. Well, Jim, we just want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your generosity of time. We know that you have many, many calls and things that you're working on right now. And so we're so grateful that you're able to share it with our team at Vanderbloemen. And several folks asked who Tim was, so I'm going to repeat who Tim is. Tim is our VP of Consulting at Vanderbloemen. He's my colleague, and he leads our entire consulting team. I would just love to take our last minute together and just pray for you, Jim, pray over the team at Generis, and for everybody who's joining us today. So let's pray together.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Dear Father, we just come before you in this time of uncertainty, and we're just so grateful for the wisdom that you have given us through experts in their field like Jim, Sheppard, and the entire Generis team. Lord, we just pray blessings upon them as they reach and help so many people right now, so many pastors and church leaders that don't know what to do and are facing really difficult decisions as it goes to stewardship and generosity. Many of them are facing calls of people in need in their community, but they don't even have the funds to help them. And so, Lord, we just pray for wisdom. We pray for discernment. We pray for your peace, Lord, that passes all understanding. And so, Lord, we just pray for the Generis team, for all of their consultants across the country, that you would give them wisdom and strength as they serve their clients and churches and ministries and the schools that they help, Lord, that you would just help us all be able to get through this time by relying on you, Lord, because as Jim said at the beginning of this webinar, we know that you are good. We know that you are for us. We know that you're sovereign, even in times where it's hard to see how this is going to end well, Lord. We know that you work all things together for your good because you've promised that in your word. And so we're grateful for you, Lord. We thank you for your love. And we just can't wait to see all of the people that are going to be drawn closer to you through this crisis. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, I'm Holly at Vanderbloemen.com. I'll put that up here for a moment so that you can grab that. Email me. We'll send you the Generis links. We'll send you the links to our Facebook. But join us back here on Tuesday. We are going to be talking to more church leaders. I honestly my brain just went blank. Tim, do you remember who we're talking to on Tuesday? I'm like,
nope, I don't remember either.
I'm pretty sure it's Jason Miller on leading remote teams. But anyway, we've got several.
Actually, it's Daniel Grothy from, we're talking about leading through crisis on Tuesday.
Perfect. It's Daniel. Daniel is the lead pastor at New Life in Colorado Springs. Thank you, Tim. Man, it takes a team over here. My brain is, woo. But yes, so join us same time, same place, Tuesday at 11 a.m. Central Time, where Tim and I will be talking with Daniel, who's the lead pastor at New Life Church. Jim, thank you so much. Blessings upon you.
Thank you, Holly.